Welcome to episode 6 of the AFA Genxt Podcast. My name is Ashley Mahadia, the New South Wales Chair for the Genxt Community of Practice and your host for this episode. A big thank you to the AFA for allowing us to host this podcast and to our supporting partner, Advice Intelligence, for powering this episode. In this episode, we speak to Sam Pereira, President of the AFA, and Phil Anderson, CEO of the AFA. We talk about their hopes for the advice world in 2022, and we also learn a little bit more about Sam and Phil. Sam and Phil, welcome to episode 6 of the AFA Genxt Podcast, and also congratulations on your recent appointments as President and CEO of the AFA.
Thanks, Ash. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks, Ash, and good to join both yourself and Sam.
Thank you. I'd like to start today with a personal question. Tell us something the AFA world does not know about you. We'll start with Sam.
Right. Well, look, I will confess I'm a cricket tragic, and that's not in itself a confession, but what I will say is I'm Sri Lankan by heritage. So, of course, when the Lions are touring Australia, I'm a closet Sri Lankan supporter. So I'm happy to confess that to you and your colleagues and my colleagues. So in addition to being a massive Cronulla Sharks fan. So that's me, Ash.
Well, we'll take that into account later on. But something from me, when I was young, when I was at university, I was into competitive windsurfing and going to windsurfing championships around the country.
Oh, wow. Did you ever think of making a living out of this?
I think it was pretty tough to make a living out of windsurfing, but no, I always had a genuine career.
How can we make 2022 a better year for financial advisors?
Well, I think we've come out of 2021, which was a really tough year on many fronts, and we go into 2022 a little bit disturbed by what's happening with COVID. But in the financial advice space, it is going to be a cleaner run this year. Advisors probably still have some bedding down to do of the stuff that came out of last year, whether that's for some, it's the annual renewal, transition year. For others, they're still dealing with the exam and the extension. So there's a little bit of bedding down to do. But I think as we work through that, people will have a year that is much more stable. There's going to be less reform. It's going to be talking about reform that might happen next. And we actually expect that the reform that happens next is largely going to be good for advice. It's going to look at how we can reduce the cost of advice, how we can make businesses more efficient, how we can make financial advice more accessible and affordable. So I think there's going to be less of that focus on reform that adds to complexity and cost. We've also seen in the later part of last year, in December last year, both the opposition and the government make announcements about education standards. And we still have to work through that process, but that may see that there's better recognition for prior learning and experience, which will be a real value for those more experienced advisors who are considering whether they choose to stay in advice for a bit longer. So we hope that will help them to make that decision to stay. And I think this all helps to a more positive mindset, more confidence, more enthusiasm about the future of advice. And that's something that we'll be focusing on and working and promoting.
Yeah, Ash, and you know, I'm glad Phil mentioned that. And it's really, to me, being part of the AFA and with Phil and along with our board and our leadership team, I'd really like to play a leading role in ensuring that the sector is focused on the opportunities within the market for our services. Phil used the word positivity. So now this does not mean we're dismissive of the significant challenges that practices and advisors have gone through, some of which we'll outline. But really, I think, it's incumbent upon the leaders within the sector is to look at focusing on the opportunities. What do I mean by that? In 2019, ASIC found that, 4 in 10 Australians intended to seek advice sometime in the future. Of course, in terms of the advice that we give, we deal with extremely complex subject matter. I mean, there's product side of things, there's tax law, there's superannuation law, etc. All of that requires experience and education and professionals to step in and help clients navigate it. I mean, we're sitting on $3.4 trillion worth of superannuation. Our savings rate in Australia has never been higher. I think we were close to 20% at the end of Q3 2021. And of course, Australians are sitting on billions of dollars worth of war chest in savings that'll find its way into the market. Talk about insurance, the underinsurance gap continues to widen as a result of PIMF, PYS, etc. So what that tells me is there are significant opportunities for professional financial advisors to advise the clients, and that opportunity will only continue to grow. And really, notwithstanding some of the challenges, and we'll cover some of that in your next question, I'd like the sector to focus on the opportunities ahead of us and start to move forward and draw a line in the sand.
Thank you. You're right. We can't talk about opportunities without talking about challenges. We'll start with you, Sam. What do you think will be the bigger challenges for the advice world in 2022, and how will the AFA help?
Yes, look, it helps, being at the helm of the AFA and being an advisor itself. And, our counterpart, Marissa, is similar. She's an advisor. So in terms of being empathetic to the plight of advisors, we're sitting in those chairs. So if I was to look at challenges within my practice, I think, and most of my colleagues would share that, is navigating red tape. Obviously, 1 October, we had a number of different regulatory regimes drop, DDO, breach reporting, annual renewal, etc. So people need to get used to that. I think looking at ways of minimising compliance-related costs is also going to be a challenge, because ultimately that cost is borne by consumers, as is accepted by the sector, legislators and regulators. Some of our colleagues will struggle with trying to get through the exam, and some might struggle getting their education sorted out whilst they're continuing to run a practice and advise clients, etc. But I think a big change, perhaps, and what I suspect is that there'll need to be some adjustment in business models. And what do I mean by that? Advisors and business owners might have to have a look at their operating models. Some might have to merge, some might have to acquire, some might have to sell. Some might have to walk away from clients that they've traditionally helped, and they may no longer be able to help because of the regulatory hurdles, the compliance costs, etc. So it might not be financially feasible for advisors to operate in those markets. Now, these are all tough decisions. Doing business the way we've always done business is an easy way of continuing, but it may not necessarily be financially the most prudent, given that the markets change. So, look, I think, to me, aside from the compliance and red tape related challenges, that adjustment of the business model is probably a sleeper in there. So, I think. And look, we always attempt to be a strong voice in the sector in terms of our advocacy work, and no doubt with Phil as CEO, he'll continue to lead our work in that regard. The quality of advice reviews at the end of the year, of course, we will be extremely active and engaged in that process. And the terms of reference are talking about looking at ways of removing duplication. And we'll also have an opportunity to comment on undesirable and unintended consequences as a result of the regulatory regime and the raft of changes that we've seen. LIF, personally, in my mind, it was an unmitigated disaster. So the AFA will be having a lot to say with about LIF and maintaining and improving the current settings if we eventually get an opportunity to do that. But to me, it's really about consumers having choice in terms of how their advisors are remunerated. So we'll be continuing to advocate quite strongly in terms of the challenges that our advisors, our members and the sector faces by responding to those reviews. And of course, in terms of our events, we are quite cognizant that they're of showcasing perhaps some of our more successful members and how they're navigating some of the changes that I've discussed. So some peer-to-peer learning.
I think one point to make is that advisors are not an homogenous group, and we have advisors who sit at different ends of different spectrums. We have the fantastic Genxt community who are new to advice and full of enthusiasm. We have more experienced advisors who might also be incredibly enthusiastic, but they're at a point where they're considering what they do with their career and when they choose to exit. We've got some who are really well qualified and some who have a lot of education still to do. We've got those who are through the exam. We're going to have, there's probably across Australia 1,000 advisors who got that extension through to the 30th of September, and they have 3 more chances to get through the exam. So the challenge that people face will be different. They'll all have their own issues. It could be also that some are really time challenged. As some are working through other issues, whether that's family or this year they're going to be challenged by COVID and the consequences of that for them personally or their families. So people will suffer a lot of challenges this year. There's no doubt about that. But what the AFA has to do is be there to support them. We have to advocate for the advisor population right across the spectrum. So we've got to consider all the different pockets that we have in our membership, that we are considering all of them in advocating for the right settings, policy settings going forward. We've got to make sure that we put on events that bring people together, that help with that sense of purpose of why they're an advisor, why they're so passionate about the work they do for their clients. We've got to also look at how we support each other. Now, the AFA provides AFA care as a service, but there's so much more that can be done in just those one-on-one interactions where advisors are looking out for their friends and colleagues and they're there to support them. When they run into rough times, that does happen from time to time. One last point to make about challenges that we will inevitably experience this year: the single disciplinary body commences this year, and whilst it only applies to events that happen from the 1st of January 2022 onwards, there are going to be people who find themselves in front of the single disciplinary body over the course of this year, and we have to make sure that they have an understanding of how the mechanism works, and they need to have people to talk to when they face that experience. So we've got to be there to help people. We've got to help them with their sense of purpose, and we've got to advocate the best that we can for policy settings that encourage efficient, profitable financial advice practices and that encourage good consumer outcomes.
With the number of financial advisors continually declining, how do we push more young people towards a career as a financial advisor?
I think there's a number of different elements here. There's issues around supply and demand, but at the start of it, we've got to improve the perception of the value of getting into a financial advice career. We've got to make people put that at the top of their priority. We've got to make them want to do it. They've got to see the value. They've got to recognise the extent to which the clients of financial advisors very much value their advisor and place them above virtually every other professional service provider that they have. They share with their clients information that they simply wouldn't share with others. They invite them to participate in major milestones in their lives, whether that's birthdays, whether it's other forms of celebration. But ultimately, in some cases, it might be that advisors are there at funerals to help the family. Clients share with advisors so much, and that's because they value their advisors so much. We've got to make sure that that is understood for those people who are looking to come into advice, that you are a truly respected person in the life of your clients. So once we can help to improve that perception of the importance of financial advice and the value of financial advice, then we can start to make a difference. We also need to work at this in many different levels. And, I'm talking obviously here with the Gen X community. You guys have relationships with people who will be great advisors. You have a role to play to encourage them to pick that up. Now, we have to collectively, and I'm talking about this in a broader regulatory sense, make it easier for people to come into financial advice. And I think the government has recognised that with their education proposal, and particularly the qualification pathway. We got to make sure the end outcome with that is sensible. And we got to make sure that people who come into advice do have the necessary skills to do it. But I think it will make a difference in making it easier to come into financial advice. And then most importantly, we've got to make sure that it makes sense for existing financial advice practices to employ people and to complete the professional year. We want to make that a constructive process, one that delivers value to the practice, one that is also going to obviously deliver great value to the professional year candidates. So we're going to do all that we can to enhance the perception of advice, to encourage more people to get into advice, and to make it easier for business owners to employ new advisors to start a career in financial advice. And that will hopefully ensure that we have a greater flow of new people in that we very much need to replace those that have already exited and those who will continue to exit over the next few years.
Well, can I start by saying you will get no better advocate for financial advisors and the work that financial advisors do than Phil Anderson. He wholeheartedly believes in the work that the sector and advisors do, which is why he's so determined in his efforts in the advocacy space, and he's recognised as such a strong voice. But one of the points that Phil made is about the sector looking out for one another, and of course, this means that recognising and helping people that are struggling. The AFA has got a great community of people, and the spirit of service runs deep in its veins. But also, it's about contributing constructively to the advancement of the sector. And I think we can all play a role in that by talking up the good work we do, as Phil said, by identifying people that might be suited to the sector, but more importantly, talking about the opportunities, which leads to me being able to answer your question. How do we push more young people towards a career as a financial advisor? I must be frank with you. There are times over the last few years where I have thought, well, would I be encouraging my own children to enter the sector, given the turmoil that the sector's in, the inherent risks involved, etc. But I share my view is, and my current assessment is, that the tide is turning as a result of interactions with regulators and the legislators, and Phil will share that. We're hearing that from people like ASIC. So essentially, why should people consider a career towards a financial as a financial advisor, and how do we do it? To me, it's about education. It's about education of what are the benefits of being an advisor. Of course, we make a significant difference in people's lives. To this audience, it's like telling you how to suck eggs, but Phil, set out about whether it be insurance, whether it's improving people's retirement outcomes, etc. There aren't too many other occupations from a professional sense that can have such a significant impact on the dignity and the lives of other human beings. So we're in quite a privileged position. Of course, as a result of the market forces, and I set out in my opening about the opportunities that are there, such as superannuation, savings rates, aging population, etc. And because of the supply and demand issues and advisors leaving the sector, I think it lends itself to good financial advisors that are in the sector or consider joining the sector to make an extremely good living if they are good at their job and put the consumer at the centre of everything they do. So you can make a significant difference in people's lives, and of course you can earn a good living doing that. So why wouldn't you be saying, yes, I will join this sector, and why wouldn't they be lining up at universities? Of course, the other point is as well is that there are a number of different options. I mean, you've got advisors that are insurance specialists, the aged care specialists that specialise in investment, specialise in Genxt, etc. So there are a myriad of options once you get into the sector to specialise in it. But I think what holds us back, and the reason I answered by using the word education, now I'm not talking about 8 units versus 12 or whatever it is, but I don't know that many Australians really understand, aside from those that get advice, about what financial advisors do. I really think that is a significant challenge. Most people know what a lawyer does and an accountant and a doctor does. Of course, there are subspecialties involved, but most people get a general sense of sort of what they do. I don't know that they do understand what financial advisors really do, and of course, because there are so many variations of what advisors do as well. I also think there are stigmas attached to financial advice. Now, again, ASIC's work and anecdotally, we all know that those of our clients have got no problems with trusting us. They value our advice. They do well as a result of our advice. They keep coming back to seek our advice. So where are the stigmas? The stigmas relate to bad headlines that invariably we've had over the last decade, certain agendas that are being pushed. And so I dare say that there is some stigma still attached to financial advisors. And I think that inhibits our ability to attract more people to the sector. So what do I think we need to do? We really need to get out, and I know there's some work being done. The FPA plays a leading role, and the AFA is doing some work, especially in places like WA, and I know Victoria's embarking on it as well, is getting into the universities, perhaps even the high schools, and talking about the career options, talking about why it's such a good move to join a sector perhaps that's not thriving now, that will continue to thrive as we move away from the last couple of years of the burdens that we've faced. Is it the job of the associations? And I want to cover this question because at times I think there's an expectation that we need to be all things to all people and everywhere, and why aren't we on that particular front? And for us, we are a small business with a big agenda. It comes down to priorities. So I believe that it is the job of the major professional associations to advance the sector, to encourage more people to join it. Have we done as well as we would have intended to do over the last few years in doing so? No. And that is because we have been distracted. We have been distracted by raft after raft of regulation, which we've had to reactively combat for the good of the sector. So I would like it to be a priority for the AFA, and I have no doubt the other major association probably feels that way as well. Whether it will inexplicably form part of our work over the course of the next 12 months, I don't know. We've just got a lot on our plate. But I really think the associations and the participants in the sector need to advance it and talk about the benefits, which are making a significant difference in people's lives, being able to earn a fabulous living if you do so and do it well, and the opportunity to specialise in a subspecialty if that's your calling. So long-winded answer, Ash, but yes.
Thank you, and I couldn't agree more. You're a current financial advisor, Sam. What is the one practical item that you think every single practice should implement?
This was a tough one for me because I'm not technically savvy, or we don't do anything unique within our business, etc. And I'm loath to tell my colleagues and friends in terms of how to suck eggs, but if I was to consider my own journey of being an advisor in a business over the last 16 years, I I've always thought myself as a business owner first and as a financial advisor second. The tiny success that I've had in my practice has been attributed to that sort of mindset. And what does that mean at a practical level? I'm always looking at my numbers. I'm gauging the matrix to assess, profitability, to make sure we're on budget, because it is a business at the end of the day. We've got capital invested, as do all advisors that run their practice. My view is, if you're not generating a return commensurate with the level of risk of running a financial advice practice, well, you've got to look at tweaking things, whether it be looking at niches or merging or selling, etc. So my practical tip, and as I've continued to do over the last week and a half as I've started my year, is really relating to planning. Now, it can take many forms, and people talk about business planning and all that sort of stuff. I don't know that it's got to be that sophisticated, but I just think the importance of looking at your business metrics and ensuring that you're scrutinising it. We're financial advisors at the end of the day. We advise our clients about these sorts of things: risks, returns, and profitability, etc. So if we're not doing it for ourselves and doing it with an open frame of mind to take into account the changing circumstances, the market forces, etc., I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice. So I submit that's probably the only practical tip I can give you. It's helped me over the last 15 to 16 years.
One of the things that I've heard in the last year or two is advisors who say they've lost their mojo, they've lost their sense of passion for what they do, or it's no longer the same fun that it used to be. They don't enjoy it as much. And it's interesting when you delve into that, often the answer is they're spending a lot more time doing compliance and back office activity. They're not spending as much time in front of clients where they get their energy. And it's really important, I think, that advisors are looking at where they are spending their time, and they're thinking about, do I have the right support resources in place? Do I have people here to help me to do those things that I don't enjoy doing? Can I do it more efficiently? What can I do to reorganize to make sure that I'm spending as much time as I possibly can in front of clients? What can I do to make sure that I'm doing things that give me energy rather than drain energy? So my feedback is, use the resources, go out there, appoint resources, whether it's outsourcing or staff. Make sure you've got the right people doing the right jobs so that you're all specialising or you're all focusing on where you add the most value. Yes, you've got to make sure your business complies, but you've also got to make sure that you're doing the stuff that generates the most value. And you've also got to be thinking about doing what you enjoy doing.
Sam, your final words to the Genxt community?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think it's an interesting question, but I think success is assured. I think success is absolutely assured for you and your professional career if you do the right thing by your clients and serve your clients as well as I'm sure you will do. We have been going through a very difficult time, but I sincerely believe that as a sector we are starting to turn the corner and there are plenty of opportunities. So stick at it. I think you'll be fabulous advisors. You'll do the sector proud. You'll continue to carry the torch forward, and will evolve, and we will be in high demand, and we'll have fabulous careers. And if I can dovetail another, and because I'm talking about Genxters and I'm casting my mind back to when I was 26 or whatever it was when I joined the sector, mentors played a significant part of my formative years in the sector. And I know, sort of almost a cliche, join the industry, find a mentor, etc. I still find that I'm drawn to people far more successful than me in order to learn about what's working and what's not. There are places like AFA events, places like MDRT, other sectors. I mean, go to FPA events, meet different people, but continue to find people that are shooting the lights out, and there are plenty of them in our sector and plenty of them that will willingly share. So I think it's I would commend to you to do that in terms of finding a mentor or looking at ways of expanding your horizons. But yes, that's me. Thanks, Ash.
Right, thanks, Ash. I think the basic premise is that Genxt, the newer advisors, are the future of advice, and we all have to do as much as we can to support them and to encourage them to take on financial advice as a lifelong career. Very supportive of the Genxt community and the role that it plays in attractive and cementing that passion for advice. I think Sam makes a really good point about mentors. I know that Sam has had some very influential people involved in his career, and I think that's a lesson for all of us, that you've got to go looking for mentors and you've got to invest in them. The value is quite substantial, that having the ability to bounce things off someone, and you might have different mentors that you bounce different things off. So I fully support that. I think the other thing about Genxt is the client's passion for advice and their need for advice has to be the symbol for all of us that this is why advice is so important. There are so many people out there who can gain so much from financial advice. And as new advisors build those relationships, many of those relationships will be ones that they hold for many, many years. You will gain so much from what you do. You just need to make sure that you're setting yourself up properly. You've got a business model that works. You've worked out what you want to specialize in. You remain flexible when things go against you. And most of all, you're always have at the top of your mind the fact that you need to be at the best of your game. So you've got to look after yourself. You got to know when you're struggling. You've got to look out for help when you need help. But the future looks very bright, so have the very best crack you can at it.
Thank you. And on behalf of the Genxt community, I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to host this podcast. I think, once again, the AFA leads the way in giving young people a voice and an opportunity to lead. I really appreciate your time on the podcast today.
Thanks, Ash, and congratulations on you leading this initiative with these podcasts. I'm sure they're much valued by your Genxt colleagues, and thanks. Appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ash. I agree.
We hope that you've enjoyed episode 6 of the AFA Genxt podcast. Massive shout out to Sam and Phil for their time. Thanks again to the AFA and Advice Intelligence. Happy New Year and see you soon.